Hello everyone. This is part 2 of the how to install a 17 or 19 inch LCD panel to run on an arcade 1UP generation 1 or 2 PCB. Of course, it's a continuation of part 1. In part 1 we did a few things. We got our parts list, we took out the bezel from the arcade 1UP cabinet, disconnected the PCB from the monitor, and we also started preparing some of the equipment to install for the to install the LCD panel into the bezel. So if you're doing a 17-inch mod, you can skip this part altogether. You'll want to go directly to the part 3 video. If you're doing a 19-inch LCD panel mod, then you're going to watch this video as you're going to have to prepare some of the parts to be used in the LCD panel upgrade to the arcade 1UP bezel. So as was stated earlier, part 2 is only if you're doing a 19-inch mod only. Again, if you're doing a 17-inch mod, skip this part, go directly to part 3. So if you're doing a 19-inch mod still, we're still preparing parts for assembly, and it's a continuation of step 4. So what we're doing additional cuts to the wood strips that we cut in part 1. We're going to drill screw holes for the new bezel plexiglass. We're also going to cut posterboard or drawing paper for the bezel border that's between the actual wood bezel and the plexiglass. And then we're going to measure and cut an outline on the arcade 1UP bezel for the 19-inch LCD panel. And then finally, we're going to make sure the 19-inch LCD panel fits in the new cut bezel. And also, we're going to put on the poster board to make sure that it outlines the LCD panel correctly. So we're going to continue on with substep G to continue on with step 4, and that's additional cuts to the wood strips. So the parts needed for this, you're going to need your 2 wood strips cut in step 4, substep A in part 1. You're also going to need your utility knife with a fresh blade. You're going to need a black Sharpie, and finally you're going to need a metallic ruler or the ruler you purchased for measuring. Okay, so you're going to cut the wood strips that you previously cut in the beginning. You're going to cut them depending on if you're doing a horizontal mod or a vertical mod. So we're going to start with the horizontal mod. So you're going to take your 2 wood strips that you cut at a length of 13 1/4 inch, and we're going to cut those down 1 to 7 1/4 of an inch, and another to 4 inch. So we're going to mark our lines here for these cuts. So from the top to the bottom, we're going to measure 7 1/4 inch, mark it, and then from that mark, we're going to measure 4 inches down. And then we'll go ahead and do the same thing for the other board. Now, just to reiterate, you're only making these cuts if you're doing a 19-inch horizontal mod. If you're doing a 17-inch mod only, you don't have to do this. If you're doing a 19-inch vertical mod, you can skip this part and go to the next one to make the cut that you need for for those strips. But anyway, once you get the marks, we're just going to draw lines, and this is where we're going to cut them. And then once we make the marks, we're going to go ahead and cut them. So now we're going to grab our utility knife again, and then we're going to score those cuts. Now, if you got a little saw or something, you can saw these as well, as you have to make sure you have a sharp blade on your utility knife. But utility knife should be okay if you don't have a little saw handy. I mean, if you have a jigsaw handy as well, you could make the cut too. But because this is so thin and basswood is so light, you can make these cuts. It's just that you have to score it a little bit before you can, and then break it off. So as you can see, we already broke off this 7 1/4 inch cut, and now we're scoring the 4 inch cut. And again, you just have to apply a little bit of pressure, and then once you do, it should just break off, and then do the same thing for the other one. So as you can see, you made the final cut here, and now we have our 2 strips, 2 7 1/4 inch and 1 4 inch for our 19-inch horizontal mod. And now we're ready to move to the next step. Okay, so if you're doing a 19-inch vertical mod, we're only going to cut one of the wood strips that you cut previously. So if you're looking at the picture here, as you can see, where we're going to cut. So basically from the top, you have a rough edge and you have a flat edge on your wood strip. The flat edge should be facing you, the rough edge should be facing outward. So from the top left to right, we're going to measure 2 1/4 inch, and then from the top we're going to measure 1/4 of an inch. And the same thing on the right side, we're going to measure right to left 2 1/4 of an inch, and then coming down we're going to measure 1/4 of an inch. And then once we have those measurements, then we're going to cut out those little notches off the wood strip. And we're only doing this on one wood strip. You don't have to do it on the second one. Make sure the flat edge is pointing towards you and the rough edge is pointing towards opposite of you. So once you confirm that, then we're going to do our measurements. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to measure from right to left. We're going to measure 2 1/4 of an inch. So we're going to take our Sharpie here and make that measurement. And again, 2 1/4 of an inch. And then we're going to do it from right to left as well and make that 2 1/4 of an inch mark. Okay, so now we're going to make that second mark there. And now once we make that mark, we're going to, from where that mark was, we're going to come down 1/4 of an inch. So we're going to take our ruler and where that mark was, we're just going to mark 1/4 of an inch. And then we're going to draw our lines. Now again, this doesn't have to be perfectly straight, and it doesn't have to measure exactly. We're just making sure that we got enough clearance for those 2 screw holes, so the bezel can connect to the marquee. And once we actually get to the point where we're going to glue this on, we're going to double check to make sure that we don't have to cut any access off and make sure we do have the clearance. So again, we're going to the other side now, and we measured 1/4 of an inch, and then we're just going to complete our lines here and then go so that we can actually cut these little notches out. So now we're going to put our Sharpie down, and we're going to get our utility knife again. You may want to get a sharper blade if it's a little dull after your other cuts. So then we're just going to score the lines that we did and take those little notches out. Just be careful not to cut yourself. These are little short cuts with the utility knife, so just be careful not to cut yourself. So now that we finished scoring, we've broken off our notches for our 19-inch vertical mod. And now we can move on to the next sub-step. Okay, for the next sub-step, we're going to drill screw holes for the new bezel plexiglass. And the parts that you're going to need the Arcade 1UP stock acrylic bezel. We're going to use that as a guide. You're going to need the 4 screws that held the Arcade 1UP stock acrylic bezel in there, because we're using those screws to hold in the new plexiglass. You're going to need 1 plexiglass that's pre-cut to the size of the Arcade 1UP stock acrylic bezel. This can be purchased again from Lowe's. Just take in your acrylic and have them cut it to the same size, and they should do that for you for free. Again, this video doesn't show you how to cut the plexiglass. Then you're going to need a power drill with a 7/32-inch drill bit. You're going to need your black Sharpie. You're going to need your 6-inch ratcheting bar clamp. And you're going to need 1 scrap of wood. And this is the wood that was left over from sub-step B or any other type of scrap wood. Now in the video, you'll notice that the bezel that I'm using is for a horizontal format. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's horizontal or vertical. Both the horizontal and vertical Arcade 1UP stock acrylic are the same size and have the same location where you drill the holes. So although I'm showing this the video is going to show for horizontal orientation, you can use this same video to do it for your vertical orientation as well. So again, showing horizontal, but you'll follow the same steps for horizontal or vertical. Okay, so we're going to take our original stock Arcade 1UP acrylic bezel and put it on top of the new plexiglass panel we had cut. And we're going to line that up in the upper left corner so that the top and the left sides are flush with the new acrylic, our new plexiglass. Doesn't matter about the bottom or the right, just as long as it's lined up on the top and the left. Then we're going to take our Sharpie and then we're going to just trace out in the screw holes. We're just going to make a black dot on each of them, and these are going to be where we're going to drill our holes at. So once that's done, we just take the stock Arcade 1UP acrylic bezel off, and then we're going to take the plexiglass with the new dots on there, and then we're going to drill our holes. Okay, so we're ready to drill the holes into the plexi. So we have our scrap wood and we have our 6-inch ratcheting clamp, and what we're going to do is on each hole that we're going to drill, we're going to put the scrap wood underneath there, and then we're going to clamp the plexi down to the scrap wood in the plexi. And once we get that clamped down, we're going to take our drill with our 7/32-inch drill bit, and we're just going to drill. You don't have to drill all the way, just a little bit, just to make the screw hole. And then once it does, take the drill out and turn the plexi and drill the next hole. Now you may be concerned that you may crack the plexi if you're not careful with it, and that's true. However, if you got the plexiglass that I recommended, which is the Duraplex or the Lexan, those brands of plexiglass are a lot more durable than the Arcade 1UP stock acrylic. So you don't have to be as gentle with it. So as you can see, I'm just clamping it down and drilling, and I'm not necessarily, having to be like really careful with it. I'm just drilling it like I would a regular piece of wood. So, and that's because that plexi is a lot more durable than the Arcade 1UP plexi. If we were drilling into the Arcade 1UP plexi, I would say, yeah, be a lot more careful with it. But again, this plexi is a lot more durable if you bought the Duraplex or Lexan, so you can be a little bit more rough with it. You still need to be careful, but it's more forgiving than the Arcade 1UP stock Lexan. So here we are drilling the last hole, and again, you're just putting it under the block, your scrap wood, and just drilling enough to drill through the plexi. And once you get all 4 done, that's it. And then we can just make sure everything lines up on the Arcade 1UP bezel. Okay, so now that I got the we got our Arcade 1UP bezel, now we're just going to line this up to the plexiglass to the bezel. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to screw these in. I'm not going to screw it in fully. I'm just going to just put it in enough to where I can line up the holes on the plexi. I'm just going to do it by hand. And these are the screws that you took out of the original Arcade 1UP bezel. We're just reusing those screws. So we're just lining them up, and once they're lined up, and once we got them in there and everything looks good, we're going to actually just screw it down just to make sure everything looks good once we screw them down. So starting with the top left, and then we'll go through all the other ones and screw them down. Okay, so we screwed down the final screw, and as you can see, everything looks good. The plexi's on there. So what I'm going to do, now that I got this in here, I'm going to write in top F, which means top front, just so I know what the top of the bezel is, and that's the front. And it's okay to write on this because we still have the film on there, so it's not going to hurt anything. And that's it. We're just going to unscrew this now from the bezel, and now we can move to the next sub step. Okay, so the next sub step that we're going to do is we're going to cut the poster board for the bezel border. This will be the border that covers up the excess bezel and has a hole in it so it displays the monitor. So what you're going to need is you're going to need the Arcade 1UP stock acrylic bezel. You're going to need the 4 screws that held the Arcade 1UP stock acrylic bezel in place. You're going to need 1 sheet of poster board or drawing paper. Now, I suggested you get black poster board or drawing paper, but you can get any color that you want. Utility knife with a fresh blade. White colored pencil. Now, I said the white colored pencil because, again, I'm using black poster board or drawing paper, but if you want if you used a different colored poster board, you may want to just use a black colored pencil. But in this case, because we're using black poster board, we're using a white colored pencil so we can see the lines that we draw. Then you're going to need your metallic ruler or the ruler that you purchased to do your measurements. And then finally, you're going to need a straight edge or scissors. And this is going to be used to cut the border out from the poster board once we get everything measured. I'm going to use a straight edge. You can use scissors to cut it out if you want. And as far as the straight edge goes, if you're using the metallic ruler, you can use that as the straight edge to make your cuts. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to outline the poster board and make an outline the same size as the Arcade 1UP stock acrylic bezel. So in order to do that, if you look at this diagram here, so you have the Arcade 1UP bezel itself, and basically you have also the outline that you drew of that of the acrylic bezel before we took it off that. So basically what you're going to do, you have the poster board, you're going to line that up in the upper left corner, and then you're going to take the Arcade 1UP acrylic bezel and you're going to put that on top of the poster board once it's lined up. So basically the poster board and the Arcade 1UP stock acrylic bezel are lined up in the upper left corner of the outline that you drew in a previous step. Okay, so here's our Arcade 1UP bezel. This is horizontal, but you do the same thing with the vertical if you had the vertical bezel. But anyway, you see the outline that we drew in one of the first steps when we took this apart. So what you want to do is you want to take your poster board or your drawing paper and line up in the upper left-hand corner of that outline you drew previously. So essentially, just take it and line it up to that corner up there that you drew. So essentially, we're just going to line that up. And you want to line up the top and the left side. You don't have to line up the right or the bottom, just as long as it's lined up on the top and the left. Okay, so now you're going to take your Arcade 1UP stock acrylic bezel and you're going to line it up with the poster board that you just lined up. So you're going to line it up exactly the same way. You're going to line up the top and the left side of the poster board, not the bezel, but the poster board that you just laid down. Then you're going to take your bezel screws and we're going to screw them down. We're going to screw the bezel down to it. So just with it lined up, you should be able to find the holes pretty easily because they all should be lined up. And so you just put your first screw in, start at the top left corner and then screw it down. And then once you have that screwed down, we're going to do the same thing for the other 3 holes. So once we screw the last screw down, we're ready to cut off the excess poster board or drawing paper from the bezel. Okay, so now we're going to take our utility knife, make sure you have a fresh blade in there, and then we're just going to cut the excess poster board or paper off. So just basically take your utility knife and ride the edge of the bezel or the acrylic Arcade 1UP bezel, and then just come down straight down riding that edge, and that should cut off the excess. And then turn it around and do the same thing on the other side. So again, just riding that bezel edge, and just pull your utility knife. It should get a straight cut. Now on the other 2 sides, you really shouldn't have anything, but there may be a little bit of excess left over. So to cut that off, just take your utility knife again and go across to cut off the excess. And then you just want to do that for the other side as well. Okay, so once we have all that excess poster board or paper cut off, we're going to take off the Arcade 1UP acrylic bezel. So we're just going to take our screws out. And then once we take that final screw out, we can take off the Arcade 1UP acrylic bezel. And that's it. We want to leave the poster board there because now we're going to make our measurements. Okay, so now that we cut out our poster board to match the size of the Arcade 1UP acrylic bezel, now we need to cut out the outline in the middle, and we have to make some measurements to do that. Or if you look at this diagram, over to the left is for the horizontal mod, and on the right is for the vertical mod. So what we're doing here is we're measuring from the end of the bezel onto the poster board that we have on here. Keeping in mind, again, we're not measuring these measurements from the edge of the poster board, we're measuring them from the edge of the arcade 1-up bezel. So with that being said, so on the horizontal, if you're doing a 19-inch horizontal mod, from left to right, from the bezel in, you want to measure 1 6/16 of an inch. From right to left, you want to measure 1 6/16 of an inch. And then from top to bottom, you want to measure 2 9/16 of an inch. And from the bottom to the top, we want to measure 3 14/16 of an inch. If you're doing a vertical mod, from left to right, you want to measure 2 13/16 of an inch. From right to left, we want to measure 2 13/16 of an inch. From top to bottom, we want to measure 1 3/16 of an inch. And then from bottom to top, we want to measure 2 1/4 of an inch. Once we make those measurements, then we can draw our outline lines, and then we can cut those lines either using either using a utility knife with a straight edge or with scissors. And finally, the video is only going to show me cutting the poster board for 19-inch horizontal. It's not going to show me cutting horizontal. It's not going to show me cutting poster board for the vertical mod. And the reason for that is because it's exactly the same thing. It doesn't make sense to repeat the video for the vertical. However, when the video is shown, one, I'm going to read off the horizontal and vertical measurements, and also on the screen, the measurements for the horizontal and the vertical will be shown. However, just note that the video is only going to show me cutting for a horizontal. Just apply your vertical measurements instead of what's shown in the video, and that'll be displayed in the legend as well. And one more thing to add to this, some of my measurements that are shown in the video may have been measured wrong. I just didn't have enough material to go back and reshoot it. So if I'm saying a measurement and if it's shown on the video that I'm measuring it wrong, just know what I'm stating is the right measurement. Also, when the legend is displayed on the screen of what measurements you should be using, those are correct as well. I just want to make a note of that because, again, when I shot the video, if the measurements are wrong, I didn't have material enough to reshoot. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so to begin with, we're going to hold down the poster board to the bezel. So we're going to take 2 of our screws, and we're going to put them in we're going to screw them in on the top. Now, if you're doing the vertical mod of this, doing the vertical cuts, you would put the screws into the bottom instead of the top. This just gives you room to use your ruler to make your measurements. But again, horizontal, put 2 screws on the top. Vertical, put 2 screws on the bottom. And then once you got those screws in, we can move to the next step. Okay, so once you got your paper in place, we'll start from the top to the bottom. Again, measuring from the top of the bezel, not from the top of the poster board. So for a horizontal, from top to bottom, it's going to be 2 9/16 of an inch. And then for the vertical, it's going to be 1 3/16 of an inch that you'll be measuring. So again, from the top to the bottom, for a horizontal, it's going to be 2 9/16 of an inch, which I'm measuring now. But if you're doing a vertical, from the top, you'd measure 1 3/16 of an inch. And then we're just going to make a notch, and we're going to do the same thing on the right side. So again, if we're doing horizontal, from the top, you're going to measure 2 9/16 of an inch. If you're doing the vertical mod, you're going to measure 1 3/16 of an inch. So once you measure the top and made your notches, then from the bottom to the top, we're going to make our measurements. So for vertical, from bottom to the top, it's going to be 3 14/16 of an inch. And for the measurements for the vertical, it's actually going to be 2 1/4 inch. So again, from bottom to top for horizontal, it's going to be 3 14/16 of an inch. For vertical, from bottom to the top, it's going to be 2 1/4 of an inch. So once we make our notches and our measurements there, make them knots, and then now we're going to measure from left to right. So take your ruler and line up your ruler to the notches you just made on the bottom. We'll start from the bottom and line those up so it's a straight line. And then from left to right, if you're doing horizontal, it's going to be 1 6/16 of an inch that you're going to measure from left to right. If you're doing a vertical, it's going to be 2 13/16 of an inch. So again, line up your ruler on the notches you made, and then from left to right, you're going to make your measurement. For horizontal, 1 6/16 of an inch. For vertical, it's going to be 2 13/16 of an inch. So again, just make sure we got it straight, and then make measurements, and then make your notch on the measurement. Okay, and then once you make your notches, I'm just going to make the dots a little bigger so it's easier to see when we connect our lines. So just color in the dots, make sure that you can see it better. And then we're going to go up to the top here. So again, the notches we made, line up your ruler on the notches that you made on the top there. And again, starting from the bezel, not from the poster board. So again, once you line that up, again, from left to right, we're going to measure 1 6/16 of an inch if we're doing horizontal. If we're doing vertical, it's going to be 2 13/16 of an inch. So again, we're just going to make our measurement and then come from the right again and do the same thing. Again, from right to left, it's going to be 1 6/16 of an inch if you're doing horizontal. If you're doing vertical, it's going to be 2 13/16 of an inch. And then once you make those little dots, just kind of draw in a little, make the dot a little bit bigger so it's easier to see with your pencil. And then once you do that, that is it. We've got our measurements. So now you can take the screws off. And once we take those screws off, then we can draw our lines. So we can make our cuts on it and make our outline. So just remove the bezel. Now that we got it, now taking your ruler, what we're going to do is make our lines on here. So we're just going to take our ruler here and we're going to line it up to each of the dots that we made, and we're going to use our pencil, and we're just going to draw a line from each dot that we drew. So just draw the line, and that's it, and then rotate it and keep repeating that until all the lines are drawn. And once we draw our last line, we're ready to do our ready to cut that outline out. So what we're going to do is, now you can use scissors to cut the outline out. I'm going to use a straight edge, which is my ruler, and then I'm going to use the utility knife to cut it. So what we're going to do is we're going to lay down the ruler onto one of the lines, or on each line to be exact, but we're going to start with one of them. And what I do is I usually take the edge and cover up the end of the white line and just line it up like that, and then hold the straight edge in place. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take your utility knife and you're just going to pull down. You're going to follow the edge of that utility knife and pull down. Now you want to start at the dot where the outline is. You don't want to start at the top of the poster board. You want to start where the outline you're going to cut out at, or that dot that we made. So again, just take your utility knife and pull down, follow the edge, hold on to that straight edge tight. Don't, make sure it doesn't loosen up or you're not going to get a straight line. So once you do that, and that'll cut out the part, that'll cut the poster board or the paper. And we're going to repeat that on all three sides. Now we're going to make our final cut, and once we do that, that's it. And then just take that outline you cut out, that excess poster board, and that's it. You have our outline for either our horizontal or our vertical. In this case it's the horizontal, but if you follow the measurements for the vertical, it should be the vertical. So with that said, now that we got that cut out, we can move out to the next sub step. Okay, for this next sub step, we're going to measure and cut the outline on the A1UP bezel for the 19-inch LCD panel. So the parts that are needed for this step are, you're going to need the A1UP stock bezel, you're going to need a black Sharpie, you're going to need a jigsaw with a wood blade, you're going to need two 6-inch ratcheting bar clamps, You're going to need a power drill with a 3/8 inch drill bit, and you're going to need a metallic ruler or the ruler you purchase to make your measurements. And then finally for this, you're going to need your safety glasses, and you're going to need a mask. Now again, we're not doing a whole lot of cutting here. We're just drilling a few holes and just cutting the outline. However, just to be on the safe side, safety glasses and a mask, only because usually with the Arcade 1UP panels, they're usually MDF, so that, you know, breathing in that dust can be unsafe. So it's just best to wear the mask and wear the safety glasses, even though we're not going to be doing any major cutting or, you know, and things of that nature. It's just best to wear the safety glasses and the mask. Okay, so in this diagram here, you'll see on the left is the horizontal bezel, and on the right is the vertical bezel. So what we're doing on the bezel is we're making measurements so that we can cut out the outline so to accommodate the 19-inch LCD panel. So if you're doing a horizontal mod on the horizontal bezel, what you're going to do is from left to right, you're going to measure 1 2/16 of an inch. From right to left, measure 1 2/16 of an inch. From top to bottom, from the top, you're going to measure 2 5/16 of an inch. And from the bottom to the top, you're going to measure 3 10/16 of an inch. For the vertical, from left to right, you're going to measure 2 9/16 of an inch. From right to left, you're going to measure 2 9/16 of an inch. From top to bottom, you're going to measure 15/16 of an inch. And then from the bottom to the top, you're going to measure 2 inches. And once we've done those measurements, then what you'll do is you'll draw the lines to make the outline. And then what we're going to do is we're going to cut the outline with the jigsaw. And once the outline's cut, then your 19-inch monitor or LCD panel should fit. Now keep in mind that the video, just like it did when we cut the poster board, the video is only going to show showing the measurements on doing the horizontal cut. It's not going to show the vertical, only because what we do with the horizontal is going to be the same thing we do with the vertical. So all you're going to do is, instead of the measurements that I read off, I'm going to read off the measurements for both the horizontal and the vertical. So just use the appropriate measurements. But the video is only going to show the horizontal. But again, it should, you know, as long as you plug in the vertical measurements, then you should be okay and be able to make this cut. And also keep in mind, again, just as it was with the poster board, on the video, if I mismeasured anything, just know the measurements that are listed here and the measurements that I tell you to do on the video are correct. So just ignore if I have a measurement that isn't right in the actual video itself. I couldn't redo it because I didn't have the parts or to redo the video. But the measurements listed here are correct. The measurements that I'm going to tell you are correct, and during the video I'll have a little legend screen that'll have the correct measurements as well. So just keep that in mind if in the video you see and say, hey, you say this, but you measured it in the video, you measured this. Just know in the video that that measurement may be wrong, but what I say and what's in the legend are correct. And one more note, for those that do not want to cut the Arcade 1UP stock bezel, you can cut your own bezel. The measurements are there that I show. Those are the measurements of the bezel, but you can also take the Arcade 1UP stock bezel and trace it so that you can get a more accurate cut if you want. However, this video doesn't show you how to cut your own bezel panel. Just note that if you cut your own bezel panel, you follow these directions the same way, same measurements going for the horizontal and the vertical. But just know that you may have to drill some holes, like the holes on the top, for example. Those are holes that when you put the bezel in the cabinet from the back, it screws into the back of the marquee. So you'll have to measure and drill those holes yourself if you want to. And you may have to, where the cabinet brackets are when it rests in the cabinet on the from the bezel to the side of the cabinet. You may have to re-drill those holes as well, but just keep that in mind that you can cut your own panel, but this video doesn't show you that. We're going to cut the stock arcade 1UP bezel. Okay, so we've got our horizontal bezel here. Now, if you're doing a vertical build, you'd have your vertical bezel. Again, the video is only going to show the horizontal, but if you can add the measurements from the vertical, and you'll be able to do your vertical cutout as well. What I'm doing here is I'm determining what the top and the bottom is, front, and which is the back. So what I usually do is once I determine what the top front is, I'll write on the board itself, I'll write on top front, and then I'll flip it over and I'll write top back or back top or something along those lines. It's just I write it down so I don't get confused as what is front, what is back, what is top, what is bottom. So once I do that, then we're going to get our ruler and we're going to start with our measurements, and we're going to start going to the top of the bezel. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure from left to right. If it's a horizontal bezel, you're going to measure 1 2/16 of an inch to the left. If it's a vertical bezel, you're going to measure from left to right 2 9/16 of an inch. Then we're going to move the ruler down, and we're going to do the same thing from left to right. Again, for the horizontal, it's 1 2/16 of an inch. For the vertical, it is 2 9/16 of an inch. Then we're going to move over to the right side and do the same thing from right to left, and it's the exact same measurement. So again, from right to left, 1 2/16 of an inch if it's horizontal, 2 9/16 if it's a vertical. And then we'll move the ruler down and make those same measurements. Again, right to left, 1 2/16 of an inch. For the vertical, it is 2 9/16 of an inch. So now we're going to connect those lines and make a straight line, going from top to bottom. So I usually get my rafter square or speed square. So I'll line that up with the notch I made and just start the line and do the same thing on the other side where the notch is that I made, a little dot. I'll line it up with that so I can keep a straight line, and then I'll take my metallic ruler to complete the line. And that's what I'm doing here. So just lining it up with the line and just completing the line so I have a straight line. And I'll do the same thing over on the left side on the notches that I made as well. Okay, so now that we completed those lines, now we're ready to measure from the top to the bottom. So taking our ruler from the top to the bottom, if you're doing a horizontal mod, you want to measure 2 5/16 of an inch, and if you're doing it for a vertical, you want to measure 15/16 of an inch. So you're doing that on the left side and doing it on the right side, and you're just lining up the ruler on the line that you just did and marking it on that line. And then then we're going to do the same thing from the bottom to the top. From the bottom to the top, if you're doing a horizontal bezel, it's 3 10/16 of an inch. If you're doing it for a vertical, it's 2 inches. So again, you're just lining up the ruler on the lines that you just drew, and you're making a mark on that line that you just drew. So now that we got those marks done, now we're going to take our speed square again, and we're going to line it up on the mark we just did and draw a line. And then once we do that, then we're going to take our ruler and we're going to complete the line. Now, if you don't have speed square, that's fine. You can just use the ruler. Just line the ruler up on the 2 marks that you made and just draw the line. I just like using the rafter square because it allows me to create a straighter line than if I used just a regular ruler. So anyway, I'm doing the same thing to the top of the marks that I made. Just drawing the line, and then using the ruler to complete the line. And then once you complete the line, that's it. So now we have our outline that we need to cut, and now we can take it outside with our jigsaw to cut out the outline. Okay, so as you can see from this diagram, we on the left we have the horizontal, and on the left we have the vertical. So this is kind of what the after you drew your lines, what the outline, what we're going to cut out is. Now notice the circled crosshairs. That's where you're going to drill with your 3/8 inch hole, or 3/8 inch drill bit. You're going to drill a hole there, so that will allow enough room for the jigsaw blade to fit in so that we can cut our straight lines. And again, I'm only doing this for a horizontal, but you do the same thing for the vertical. Okay, so we're going to take our panel and we're going to drill our holes first. So we don't need a clamp for this. We can hold it with our hand, but if you want to use a clamp, you can. So we're going to use our power drill with our 3/8 inch drill bit, and we're just going to drill our holes. So just hold the bezel in place with your hand, or clamp it down, however you want to do it, and just line up your drill bit with the crosshair and just drill. And once you drill, then we're just going to flip it 90 degrees and do the same thing across all the other three sides. Okay, so once we drill the holes, we got them done, and now we're ready to blow off the dust off there. And then now we're ready to use our jigsaw to cut the outline. Okay, so we're going to adjust the bezel to kind of hang off a little bit off our workbench, and then we're going to use our two 6-inch clamps to hold it down in place. And then once we do that, we're going to grab our jigsaw with the wood blade on it. And what we're going to do is we're going to insert the blade in there, and we're just going to cut along the straight line. You want to try to keep it as straight as we can. If it's not straight, it's okay, but again, we want to try to keep it as straight as possible. So again, just kind of glide it across and get that straight line across there. Now once we reach the end where we're about to reach the cut, because there's that routed out little piece that held the old monitor, the jigsaw may stop because it's hitting the edge there. Just kind of move your jigsaw over, kind of lean it to the left to kind of get over that little bump. And then again, we only want to cut to the other hole. We don't want to go past the hole. So once we cut, then we're going to rotate it 90 degrees and repeat the process on the other three sides. This is where I'm making my final cut, and you'll see here in a minute where my jigsaw is going to stop because of that routed out monitor. So I just kind of move it, tilt it to the left a little bit so I can complete the cut. And then once that's cut out, that's it. Just remove your clamps. And once we remove the clamps, we should be able to take out that outline. The clamp will get off there. There we go. And take out what you cut out. And now you have your panel. And now that should accommodate the new 19-inch LCD panel that we decased. So now with that done, we can move to the last sub-step of this part 4 step. Okay, for the final sub-step in step 4, we're going to make sure the 19-inch LCD panel fits in the new cut bezel, and we're also going to check to make sure that the bezel outline that we made with the poster board fits in as well. So what you're going to need for this is you're going to need the A1UP bezel cut for the 19-inch LCD panel that we just did in sub-step J. Then you're going to need our bezel outline, which is the poster board that we made in sub-step I. And then you're going to need those 4 screws that held the A1UP stock acrylic bezel in place. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to not only check to make sure the LCD monitor fits, but we're also going to screw in the A1UP, the bezel outline that we created. We're going to screw that on just to make sure everything looks right, and to cut anything that we need to before we move forward. Okay, so we'll check the horizontal panel first. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our horizontal poster board that we had, and we're going to line that up with the on the bezel there. So we're just going to line those screw holes up, and we're not going to screw it completely down. We're just going to put screws in to hold everything in place, so that when we do put this on top of the monitor or the LCD panel, it doesn't move around. Okay, so once we've got the screws in place, we're just going to take our panel that we put the brackets on, and we're just going to set that on top of there. Now just be careful, because the monitor will come out more, and it may bend the paper a little bit, but that's fine. We'll fix that once we put our strips on there in part 3. But as you can see, everything looks okay. The left probably was cut a little bit more than the right, and again, this is where you can start adjusting it. So if you want to cut a little bit off on the right to make it look even, that's fine. Just note that anything that's showing up on the silver, that's going to be covered with friction tape, so that's going to show up black as well. So if everything looks okay and the monitor fit, if the monitor didn't fit, you'd have to recut it a little bit to make it fit, but everything looks okay here. So now we can go ahead and check on the see how the vertical panel looks like. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing for the vertical panel. We're going to take our cutout that we did here and set it on there, and again, we're going to put we're going to screw them on. We're not going to screw it in completely. We're just going to screw it in enough just to hold it in place while we set it on the LCD panel. Okay, so now that we got it screwed down, now we can check our panel to see how it fits. So we're just going to set that down, and we're going to set the panel on top of it. Just know that the panel is going to probably push up on the black border, because it's not flush with it yet, but that'll be done in part 3. But as we put this down, as you can see, everything looks okay. Again, looks like maybe the left is showing more than the right, but again, this is the point where you can cut that. So if you want to measure it and you think it looks, doesn't look good, you can go ahead and cut it. The poster board again, and the LCD panel does fit into the bezel, so we don't have to recut that. And again, anything that silver that's showing, that's going to be covered with friction tape once we get it all screwed down and everything. But everything looks good to me. Again, if it doesn't look good to you, you can recut the poster board, but looks good to me. And that's it for this sub-step. And so that concludes part 2 of the video series. So in part 3, you're going to actually assemble the LCD panel into the bezel and put it back in the arcade 1UP, and then you'll have your new 17 or 19 inch LCD panel installed in your cabinet. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.